The cruelest heartbreak isn't being rejected. It's realizing the person you would have given your whole life to never truly noticed you were there. The royal castle of Blackwood stood beneath a pale autumn sky, its towering stone walls glowing softly in the early morning light as banners bearing the silver wolf crest drifted in the cool breeze. Servants hurried across polished courtyards carrying baskets of fresh bread, bundles of herbs, and stacks of neatly folded cloaks while soldiers prepared for another day of drills beyond the castle gates. Every hallway echoed with purpose. Every room moved like clockwork, and everyone believed the kingdom functioned because its alpha king was unmatched in strength and wisdom. No one ever questioned the invisible hands that quietly kept everything together. Olivia Carter stood in the eastern corridor holding a small wooden tray with a steaming cup of black tea prepared exactly the way Alpha King Ethan Blackwood preferred after returning from dawn training. She never needed anyone to remind her of his routine. She had memorized it years ago. 9 years was enough time to remember every favorite meal, every restless night before a council meeting, every scar that ached whenever rain drifted across the mountains. Every anniversary he never celebrated because duty always came first. She approached the study with the same silent footsteps she had practiced since she was 17, gently placing the cup on the corner of his desk before he even looked up from the endless maps spread across the polished oak surface. Ethan's silver eyes never left the reports in front of him. "Thank you," he said absently, already reaching for the cup without seeing who had delivered it. Olivia smiled anyway. It was a small smile, almost invisible, the kind that had become second nature after years of accepting whatever little moments life placed into her hands. She quietly adjusted the curtain to soften the glare of the rising sun before slipping back toward the hallway. He never noticed she always did that because the bright morning light bothered his eyes after long nights spent reading military reports. Outside, the castle slowly awakened. Young wolves laughed while practicing sword forms in the training yard. Children chased each other through the gardens beneath trees glowing with golden leaves. Advisors filled the grand hall with discussions about trade routes, harvest festivals, and neighboring pacts. Olivia moved through every room like a gentle breeze, offering help wherever it was needed. She calmed frightened pups separated from their parents during the morning market. She organized medicine for elderly pack members waiting at the infirmary. She quietly corrected mistakes hidden inside official schedules before they could become embarrassing problems for the royal court. Whenever someone thanked her, she answered with the same warm expression. "I'm happy to help." Most people believed she simply enjoyed serving others. Few realized she stayed because Ethan's happiness had somehow become woven into her own. 9 years earlier, she had arrived at Blackwood Castle as a timid young Omega with nothing except a faded suitcase, a hopeful heart, and a promise to assist the royal household after her parents passed away during a harsh winter illness. She expected to remain for one season. Instead, one season quietly became almost a decade. She watched Ethan grow from a determined young ruler carrying impossible expectations into the respected alpha king every neighboring territory admired. She celebrated every victory from the shadows. She worried through every difficult decision. She listened from outside closed council doors whenever arguments stretched late into the night, preparing fresh coffee before anyone asked because she knew exhaustion always made Ethan skip meals. She loved him without asking for anything in return because somewhere along the way she convinced herself that loving someone silently was enough. Maybe one day he would notice. Maybe one day fate would become kinder. Maybe one day she would gather enough courage to tell him how every sunrise reminded her of the first morning she saw him standing alone on the castle balcony, looking less like a king and more like a lonely young man trying not to disappoint an entire kingdom. Those maybes became months. The months became years. The years became habits so deeply rooted that even Olivia forgot when hope quietly transformed into routine. Later that afternoon, Ethan crossed the castle courtyard surrounded by advisors discussing preparations for the upcoming Founders' Celebration, the largest gathering Blackwood had hosted in years. Noble families from every allied pack would arrive within days, and every detail needed to be flawless. "The guest lists are finished," one advisor reported. "The banquet hall is nearly ready," another added. "The musicians have confirmed." Ethan nodded, focused entirely on logistics while walking straight past Olivia, who stood beside the fountain arranging autumn flowers requested for the celebration. Their shoulders almost brushed. For one brief heartbeat, she looked up, hoping he might pause, ask how she had been, or simply smile the way he smiled at everyone else. Instead, he continued walking without realizing she had even been standing there. Olivia watched his figure disappear beyond the marble archway until only the sound of distant footsteps remained. Around her, the fountain continued singing its gentle melody while bright leaves drifted across the water like tiny golden boats carried wherever the current wished. She lowered her eyes and quietly returned to arranging the flowers exactly the way she always did. Somewhere deep inside her heart, a tiny voice whispered words she had spent 9 years refusing to hear. Perhaps the hardest person to leave behind was the one who never realized you had been beside him all along. The days leading to the founder's celebration unfolded with the quiet rhythm Olivia Carter had known for nearly a decade. Before sunrise, she walked through the castle kitchens, making certain every pantry shelf was stocked and every servant understood the schedule that would soon welcome hundreds of distinguished guests. She inspected the guest chambers one by one, replacing wilted flowers with fresh white lilies, straightening blankets that no visitor would ever realize had been touched with such care, and leaving handwritten notes for the younger servants whenever she noticed small details they had overlooked. No one had asked her to do these things. She simply understood that if she did not, someone else would eventually carry the burden, and she never wanted another person to feel overwhelmed when she could quietly make life easier instead. Ethan Blackwood remained consumed by meetings from morning until long after sunset. Every conversation centered on alliances, harvest agreements, border patrols, and preparations for the celebration. Whenever Olivia happened to cross paths with him, she greeted him with the same gentle smile she had worn for years. He always answered politely, sometimes with a thankful nod, sometimes with a distracted smile, but his attention drifted back toward the endless responsibilities waiting for him before either of them could say another word. There had never been cruelty in his silence. That was what made it hurt so deeply. He was kind to everyone. She had simply become part of the castle itself, as ordinary and dependable as the stone walls surrounding them. One afternoon, Olivia entered the royal library carrying several ledgers that needed Ethan's signature. She paused just outside the partially open door when she heard laughter inside. Ethan stood beside the fireplace, speaking with Lady Isabella Hawthorne, the daughter of an influential alpha family from the Western Territories. She was graceful, confident, and carried herself with the effortless elegance expected from someone raised among nobility. They discussed the upcoming celebration, sharing stories from previous gatherings while several advisors smiled nearby. Olivia waited patiently until the conversation ended, then stepped inside without making unnecessary noise. Ethan accepted the ledgers from her with sincere appreciation. Perfect timing, Olivia. I almost forgot these. He signed each page quickly before handing them back. You always remember what everyone else misses. His words should have made her heart lighter. Instead, they settled quietly inside her like autumn leaves falling onto still water. He appreciated what she did. He depended on what she remembered. Yet he still did not truly see the woman standing in front of him. As she walked away from the library, she found herself wondering whether anyone could spend 9 years beside another soul without realizing how often their eyes searched for them across crowded rooms. That evening, the castle gardens glowed beneath strings of lanterns being tested for the celebration. Olivia wandered through the winding paths after finishing her work, enjoying the peaceful sound of water flowing through the marble fountains. An elderly gardener named Mr. Bennett looked up from trimming rose bushes and smiled warmly when he noticed her. You have been taking care of this place for as long as I can remember, he said. Olivia laughed softly. Sometimes I think the castle takes care of me instead. The old gardener studied her thoughtful expression before speaking again. People often notice the brightest stars first, but gardens survive because of quiet roots no one ever sees. His words lingered long after they said goodnight. Later, alone inside her modest room overlooking the eastern courtyard, Olivia opened a weathered wooden box resting beneath her bed. Inside were tiny memories collected over 9 years that no one else would have considered valuable. A dried maple leaf Ethan had absent-mindedly placed inside a book one autumn afternoon. a ribbon from the first founder's celebration she attended, a small silver button that had fallen from Ethan's traveling cloak years earlier, which she had quietly sewn back before he noticed it was missing. At the very bottom rested a folded piece of paper she had written long ago but never delivered. She unfolded it carefully, smiling through quiet tears as she recognized her own younger handwriting. Every line spoke of admiration, hope, and dreams she had once believed time might gently fulfill. She folded the letter once more and returned it to the box with extraordinary care. Then she looked toward the moonlit window and whispered words she had never allowed herself to say aloud before. Perhaps loving someone also means knowing when it is finally time to stop waiting. The morning before the founder's celebration arrived wrapped in crisp mountain air, and the castle buzzed with greater urgency than Olivia Carter had ever witnessed. Carriages rolled through the front gates carrying noble families from distant territories, while servants hurried across the courtyards balancing polished silver trays and fresh flower arrangements. Music drifted faintly from the grand ballroom, where musicians rehearsed for the evening festivities, and laughter echoed through the marble halls as honored guests greeted one another with warm embraces. Olivia moved quietly through the excitement, making certain every detail matched the careful plans she had organized weeks earlier. Every room welcomed its visitors with fresh linens, glowing fireplaces, and handwritten notes listing the celebration schedule. Every table held exactly the right number of place settings. Every guest received the accommodations that best suited their family traditions. As always, everything appeared effortless because no one ever saw the countless hours hidden beneath the finished result. Shortly before noon, Ethan Blackwood gathered his advisors in the Great Hall for one final review before the celebration officially began. Olivia stood near the entrance with a stack of updated seating charts, waiting for the brief moment when someone might need them. Ethan thanked his council for their dedication and praised the officers responsible for security, the royal chefs for preparing the banquet, and the diplomatic committee for welcoming distinguished visitors. Applause filled the hall as each department received recognition. Olivia remained perfectly still, listening with the same quiet smile she always wore. She did not expect her own name to be mentioned. She had stopped expecting that years ago. Yet for reasons she could not explain, something inside her still waited through the final moments of the meeting. Ethan concluded with a grateful nod. Together, we have prepared a celebration worthy of Blackwood. The room filled with proud conversation as everyone dispersed to their responsibilities. Olivia looked down at the unused seating charts in her hands and realized she had been holding her breath without noticing. She slowly exhaled, folded the papers neatly, and walked away before anyone could see the sadness gently settling across her face. That afternoon, she returned to her room earlier than usual. Sunlight poured through the window, covering the wooden floor with warm golden light that reminded her of countless peaceful evenings spent believing tomorrow might finally be different. Instead of preparing another schedule or reviewing another checklist, she opened the small wardrobe that held nearly everything she owned. There were only a few dresses, a winter cloak, comfortable shoes for long days of work, and the faded blue sweater her mother had knitted before she passed away. Olivia carefully packed them into the same weathered suitcase she had carried into Blackwood Castle 9 years earlier. The simple action felt strangely unreal, as though she were watching someone else's life unfold instead of her own. She paused only once, lifting the small wooden memory box from beneath her bed. After a long moment, she removed the folded letter she had never delivered and carried it to the fireplace. She did not burn it. Instead, she smiled softly, tore the pages into tiny pieces, and placed them beneath the glowing embers until the words she had protected for nearly a decade quietly disappeared into warm gray ash. Some dreams, she realized, deserved a peaceful goodbye instead of endless waiting. As evening approached, Olivia walked one final time through the castle gardens where autumn leaves danced across familiar stone paths. Mr. Bennet looked up from watering late-blooming roses and immediately sensed something had changed. "You look lighter today," he observed gently. Olivia nodded with surprising calm. "I think I finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to hold." The old gardener smiled with quiet understanding. "Then wherever you go next, may you discover people who notice your heart before they notice your kindness." She thanked him with tears shining in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. When darkness settled over Blackwood Castle and the first lanterns illuminated the celebration outside, Olivia returned to her room one last time. She removed the small silver key that opened every supply room, every archive, and every quiet corner she had cared for throughout the years. Alongside it, she placed a handwritten letter addressed simply to His Majesty Ethan Blackwood. The letter contained no confession, no blame, and no hidden plea for him to stop her. It thanked him for giving a lonely young Omega a place she had once called home, wished peace upon the kingdom, and respectfully resigned from her position within the royal household. Before dawn painted the eastern sky, Olivia lifted her worn suitcase, closed the door without making a sound, and walked down the silent hallway that had witnessed almost every chapter of her adult life. No footsteps followed behind her. No voice called her name. The castle remained peacefully asleep as the woman who had quietly held it together for 9 unforgettable years disappeared beyond the front gates, believing that some stories only begin after someone finally finds the courage to walk away. Morning sunlight poured through the towering windows of Blackwood Castle, but something about the familiar rhythm of the palace felt strangely uneven. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying trays of breakfast and fresh linens. Yet conversations were interrupted by small moments of uncertainty that no one could quite explain. A young maid stopped outside the royal pantry, staring helplessly at shelves labeled in handwriting she had never noticed before. She whispered to another servant, asking where the extra tea leaves reserved for visiting elders had been stored. Neither of them knew the answer. In the kitchens, the head chef frowned while searching through ingredient lists that suddenly seemed incomplete. Olivia had always updated them before sunrise. Today, blank spaces stared back at him. The royal physician arrived at the infirmary only to discover that several medicine deliveries had not been organized into their proper cabinets. Patients were never placed in danger, but precious minutes disappeared while everyone searched for supplies that had once appeared exactly where they belonged. Throughout the castle, dozens of tiny inconveniences quietly gathered like falling snowflakes. Alone, each one seemed insignificant. Together, they created a feeling that something essential had quietly vanished. Ethan Blackwood spent the early hours greeting noble guests who had remained after the founder's celebration. He listened to reports from neighboring leaders, approved trade agreements, and thanked every visitor for honoring Blackwood with their presence. Yet, even as conversations continued around him, he found himself waiting for his usual cup of black tea after the morning council session. None arrived. One of the younger servants eventually hurried into the meeting room, carrying a tray with herbal tea instead. Ethan accepted it politely before taking a single sip. The flavor was unfamiliar. He smiled kindly and set the cup aside without complaint. The servant apologized repeatedly, embarrassed by the mistake. Ethan simply assured the nervous young woman that everything was perfectly fine. He never realized someone had quietly memorized his preferences for nearly 9 years without ever asking for recognition. By late afternoon, the castle steward approached Ethan, carrying several unfinished reports. "Your Majesty, the inventory records are missing several updates. We cannot determine which supplies have already been delivered." Ethan looked up from the document in his hands. Surely someone has been managing them. The steward exchanged an uncertain glance with another advisor. Someone always did. We simply never noticed exactly who. Ethan nodded thoughtfully before returning to his work, believing the problem would resolve itself within a day or two. Across the castle, similar conversations unfolded again and again. Stable hands discovered feeding schedules that existed only in memory. The laundry staff realized no one remembered which ceremonial cloaks required special cleaning before winter storage. Visiting ambassadors asked for local maps that no one could immediately locate because Olivia had always prepared them before guests even thought to request them. Each small task revealed another invisible thread she had quietly woven into the life of the kingdom. As evening settled across the mountains, Mr. Bennet carefully watered the castle gardens alone. One of the younger gardeners admired the perfectly arranged flower beds before asking, "Did you design all of this?" The old man smiled gently and shook his head. "No, a young woman with remarkable patience did. She believed flowers should greet people before words ever could." The younger gardener looked around with surprise. "Where is she tonight?" Mr. Bennet gazed toward the empty eastern walkway where Olivia often paused after finishing her work. I do not know, he answered softly, but I hope someone appreciates her wherever she is. Meanwhile, several miles away, Olivia Carter followed a quiet country road stretching between golden fields and rolling hills painted with the colors of early autumn. She carried her weathered suitcase in one hand, while cool afternoon wind played gently with strands of her light brown hair. Every step placed a little more distance between herself and the castle that had shaped most of her adult life. The ache inside her heart had not disappeared, but it no longer felt heavy enough to stop her from moving forward. She passed a small roadside bakery where the sweet scent of fresh bread drifted through the open windows. For the first time in many years, she realized no schedule waited for her. No meeting required preparation. No report needed organizing before sunrise. She was simply a traveler walking toward an unknown future. The thought frightened her, yet it also filled her with an unfamiliar sense of peace. Back at Blackwood Castle, night settled quietly over the ancient stone walls. Ethan finally returned to his study after another exhausting day and instinctively reached toward the corner of his desk where a fresh stack of tomorrow's schedules was always waiting before bedtime. His hand touched only polished wood. He frowned for a brief moment, assuming someone had forgotten a routine task. Then he opened the desk drawer to organize the papers himself, unaware that this tiny interruption was only the first whisper of a much larger absence that neither his kingdom nor his heart had fully begun to understand. 3 days passed before Ethan Blackwood finally allowed himself a quiet morning without council meetings. The castle had gradually settled after the founder's celebration, yet an unusual tension lingered beneath its familiar routines. Reports arrived later than expected. Guest correspondence required unexpected revisions. The kitchens somehow managed to prepare every meal, but the effortless precision that had once defined Blackwood had quietly faded. Ethan noticed the changes without truly understanding why they continued to happen. Standing beside the tall windows of his study, he looked across the eastern courtyard where servants crossed the stone paths carrying baskets of linens and fresh flowers. Something felt different. He could not explain it, only that the castle no longer breathed with the same quiet harmony it always had. He turned toward his desk, searching for the weekly household ledger that was normally placed beside the morning reports. It was missing. He rang the small silver bell resting near the edge of the table. A young attendant entered almost immediately. "Would you ask Olivia to bring me the household ledger?" Ethan said, without looking up from another document. The young woman hesitated. "Your Majesty." Her uncertain voice finally drew his attention. "Yes." She lowered her eyes respectfully. "Lady Olivia is not here." Ethan offered a patient smile, assuming she had misunderstood. "She is probably organizing supplies somewhere. Please let her know I would like to speak with her when she has a moment." The attendant remained motionless. "Your Majesty." Lady Olivia left the castle. Silence settled over the room. Ethan blinked once, almost expecting the words to correct themselves. "Left," he repeated calmly. "She resigned from the royal household 3 mornings ago." His expression remained composed, yet the sentence refused to fit inside his understanding of the world. Olivia did not simply leave. She had always been there. Every season, every celebration, every ordinary morning. "Why was I not informed?" he asked quietly. Before the attendant could answer, the castle steward entered carrying several documents. He stopped immediately after noticing the unusual stillness. "Your Majesty?" Ethan turned toward him. "Olivia resigned." "When exactly did this happen?" The steward's face reflected immediate regret. "The morning after the celebration. She left a letter and returned every castle key before sunrise. I believed someone had already informed you." Ethan slowly reached for the back of his chair, his thoughts moving more slowly than usual. "Bring me the letter." Moments later, the steward placed a neatly folded envelope upon the desk. Ethan recognized the elegant handwriting before opening it. There were no accusations inside, no sadness carefully disguised as politeness, no hidden request asking him to stop her. Olivia simply thanked Blackwood for allowing her to serve the kingdom, expressed sincere gratitude for the years she had spent there, wished prosperity upon the castle, and respectfully resigned from her position. She ended the letter with a single sentence that lingered in the quiet room long after he finished reading. "Some journeys must continue beyond the places that once felt like home." Ethan folded the letter with extraordinary care. His silver eyes remained fixed upon the paper for several long moments. Then, almost without thinking, he asked the question that surprised even himself. "Where did she go?" The steward lowered his head. "We do not know, Your Majesty. She left before dawn and did not tell anyone her destination." Ethan walked toward the window overlooking the eastern gate. 3 mornings. She had been gone for 3 entire mornings, and he had not noticed. He searched his memory, replaying the previous days one by one. The missing schedules, the unfamiliar tea, the unfinished reports, the small inconveniences that had quietly multiplied throughout the castle. None of them had seemed connected until this very moment. He suddenly remembered countless ordinary scenes he had never truly examined. A warm cup waiting beside his desk before difficult meetings. Fresh maps appearing before diplomatic visits. Winter cloaks repaired before the first snowfall. His favorite books returned to the shelves exactly where he expected to find them. None of those things had happened by chance. They had happened because Olivia had quietly chosen him every single day. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, hearing her gentle voice in memories so ordinary that he had almost forgotten them. She had never asked for recognition, never interrupted his work, never demanded his attention. She had simply remained beside him through every demanding season of his reign, until one morning she chose herself instead. For the first time in many years, the vast castle surrounding Ethan Blackwood no longer felt like the center of a thriving kingdom. It felt impossibly large, strangely quiet, and unexpectedly empty, because the one person whose presence had become woven into every ordinary moment was no longer there. The following morning, Ethan Blackwood canceled 2 council meetings for the first time in years. His advisors exchanged puzzled glances, but wisely asked no questions. Instead of reviewing military reports or trade agreements, he walked alone through the castle corridors that had once felt so familiar. Every corner seemed to carry a memory he had never paused long enough to appreciate. He stopped outside the infirmary where the royal physician was carefully reorganizing shelves filled with herbs and medicine bottles. The elderly healer smiled politely before letting out a tired sigh. Lady Olivia always arranged everything according to the seasons, he admitted. She said it saved precious time whenever frightened families arrived needing help. Ethan looked across the neatly labeled cabinets. Even now, weeks of careful planning still lingered in every handwritten note she had left behind. The physician continued quietly. She stayed many evenings after everyone else had gone home. I told her more than once that she should rest, but she always smiled and answered that tomorrow would be easier if she finished one more task today. Ethan thanked him before continuing through the castle, carrying those words with him like an unexpected weight. Later he visited the royal kitchens, where the head chef struggled to organize deliveries from neighboring farms. The older man laughed softly when Ethan asked whether Olivia had often worked there. "Worked here," he replied. "Your Majesty, she practically rescued us every harvest season. She knew which farmers needed early payments after difficult winters. She remembered which children could not eat certain foods. She even convinced visiting merchants to donate extra bread whenever storms delayed supply wagons." Ethan listened without interrupting. It was another piece of a life he had never truly seen. By afternoon, he wandered into the castle gardens where Mr. Bennet carefully trimmed the last blooming roses before autumn frost arrived. The old gardener looked up with kind eyes that seemed to understand why the Alpha King had come without needing an explanation. They walked together along the quiet stone path until they reached a wooden bench overlooking the fountain where Olivia had so often paused after finishing her work. "She liked sitting here at sunset," Mr. Bennet said gently. "She believed flowers looked happiest when nobody was watching them." Ethan lowered his gaze toward the colorful blossoms moving gently in the breeze. "Did she ever speak about leaving?" he asked. The gardener nodded slowly. "Not directly, but during the past year, she asked me something unusual." He paused before continuing. "She asked whether roots could survive if they stayed planted in soil that never noticed they were growing." Ethan remained silent. The old man smiled sadly. "I told her that healthy roots eventually search for places where they can continue growing." Those simple words echoed inside Ethan long after the conversation ended. As evening approached, he found himself standing outside the modest room Olivia had once called home. The door remained exactly as she had left it. After a long hesitation, he stepped inside. The room was remarkably simple. A narrow bed rested beside the window overlooking the eastern courtyard. A bookshelf held novels, gardening guides, medical references, and journals filled with careful notes about castle schedules. Fresh air drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Everything reflected quiet order, warmth, and gentle purpose. On the small desk rested a leather notebook the servants had overlooked while packing her belongings. Ethan opened it carefully, expecting inventory records or household reminders. Instead, he discovered pages filled with observations about the people she cared for. One page reminded her to congratulate a young stable hand after his first successful riding lesson. Another noted that the elderly librarian preferred peppermint tea whenever cold weather made her joints ache. Several pages listed birthdays, anniversaries, and thoughtful gift ideas for servants whose names Ethan barely recognized. There was almost nothing about herself. She had spent years remembering everyone else's lives while quietly placing her own dreams aside. Ethan slowly closed the notebook and looked around the silent room once more. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he understood that leadership was not measured only by victories, titles, or respect earned on distant battlefields. Sometimes the strongest foundation of an entire kingdom was built by one gentle heart that expected nothing in return. And for the first time in 9 years, Ethan Blackwood realized he had known Olivia Carter's kindness every single day without ever truly knowing Olivia herself. The next sunrise found Ethan Blackwood riding beyond the castle walls without the usual royal escort. He needed answers that could not be found inside council chambers or official records. Following a quiet instinct, he traveled toward the small village where Olivia had first lived before coming to Blackwood Castle nearly a decade earlier. The narrow roads wound through rolling hills painted with shades of amber and crimson, and every mile seemed to carry him farther away from the certainty that had always defined his life. For years he had believed he understood every important part of his kingdom. Now he realized there had been an entire world living quietly beside him that he had never taken the time to see. By midday, he reached a modest cottage surrounded by wildflowers that continued blooming despite the cooling autumn air. An elderly woman sat peacefully on the front porch, knitting a warm scarf while sunlight rested gently across her silver hair. She looked up before Ethan could introduce himself, her wise eyes carrying the calm expression of someone who had already guessed why he had come. "You must be the Alpha King," she said softly. Ethan inclined his head with respect. "I am searching for Olivia Carter." The woman smiled with quiet affection at the sound of her granddaughter's name. "I am Margaret Carter. Please, sit with me." Ethan accepted the invitation without hesitation. For a few peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were birds singing from nearby maple trees and the gentle breeze moving through tall grass. Finally, Margaret folded her knitting into her lap and asked, "Have you come because you finally noticed she is gone, or because you finally noticed who she was?" The question settled heavily between them. Ethan lowered his eyes before answering honestly. "Perhaps both." Margaret nodded, as though she had expected nothing less. "Olivia never blamed you," she said. "That surprised me more than anything." Ethan looked toward her with quiet confusion. "She should have." The older woman shook her head. "No, my granddaughter has never carried bitterness in her heart. Only hope." She stood slowly and disappeared inside the cottage before returning with a small wooden box tied carefully with a faded blue ribbon. "She left this with me several years ago. She asked me to destroy it if she ever stopped believing in impossible dreams. I could never bring myself to do that." Ethan accepted the box carefully. Inside rested dozens of neatly folded letters, each dated with a different year. None had ever been mailed. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the first page. It described the excitement Olivia had felt after her first week at Blackwood Castle, thanking fate for allowing her to meet a young alpha who carried the weight of an entire kingdom with such quiet determination. Another letter spoke about watching Ethan skip dinner after difficult council meetings, wishing she could somehow convince him that even kings deserve to rest. Another celebrated the anniversary of his coronation, though she admitted she had watched the ceremony from the back of the crowd because she believed that was where she belonged. Year after year, the letters continued, never asking for anything, never demanding to be loved in return. They simply recorded the steady rhythm of a heart that chose the same person every single day without expecting the world to notice. Ethan continued reading until the final letter. It had been written only a few weeks before Olivia left. The handwriting remained graceful, but the words carried a quiet acceptance he had never imagined. She wrote that loving someone should never require disappearing inside their shadow forever. She thanked Ethan for unknowingly teaching her kindness, patience, and resilience, then admitted she was finally learning one last lesson on her own. She deserved to build a life where her own heart was not always the last one remembered. Ethan carefully lowered the letter, unable to speak. The autumn wind stirred the pages gently across his hands while memories returned with painful clarity. Every ordinary smile, every quiet greeting, every morning she had stood nearby while he hurried toward another responsibility without truly seeing the woman waiting only a few steps away. Margaret watched him with compassion rather than judgment. She turned away many opportunities over the years, she said softly. Good men admired her. Several families offered her comfortable homes and happy futures. She thanked every one of them with kindness because she believed her heart had already chosen. Ethan looked at the letters resting in his hands, overwhelmed by the realization that the greatest loyalty he had ever received had never been demanded by duty or destiny. It had been freely given by someone whose quiet love he had mistaken for ordinary presence. And in that silent autumn afternoon, surrounded by pages filled with 9 years of unwitnessed devotion, Ethan Blackwood finally understood that the greatest loss in his life had not begun on the morning Olivia walked away. It had begun years earlier, each time he failed to truly see the remarkable woman standing faithfully beside him. When Ethan Blackwood left Margaret Carter's cottage, he carried the small wooden box as carefully as though it contained the most valuable treasure in his kingdom. In truth, it did. Every letter inside represented a day he could never live again, a kindness he could never properly thank, and a love he had never taken the time to recognize. He no longer traveled as a king searching for a missing member of his household. He traveled as a man hoping he had not arrived too late. Margaret had given him only one clue before he departed. Several days earlier, Olivia had mentioned a lakeside town called Willow Creek, a peaceful community nearly 100 miles south of Blackwood, where an elderly healer had been searching for someone willing to help organize a small clinic. It was exactly the kind of place Olivia would choose, not because it offered comfort or prestige, but because someone there needed her. Ethan rode through 2 long days of changing autumn landscapes, crossing quiet forests where golden leaves drifted across the road, and passing family farms preparing for the coming winter. Along the journey, he stopped in small villages, asking shopkeepers, innkeepers, and travelers whether they had seen a young Omega with gentle brown eyes and an unhurried smile who seemed to remember everyone's name after meeting them only once. The answers surprised him. More than one person smiled immediately. "You mean the kind woman who helped our baker organize free meals for elderly neighbors?" one merchant asked. Another nodded with recognition. "She stayed here for one evening and repaired all the books in our little school library before sunrise." At a roadside inn, the owner laughed warmly. "She noticed my wife had been working too hard and insisted on helping prepare breakfast for every guest before continuing her trip." Every story sounded different, yet everyone carried the same quiet truth. Olivia had not changed after leaving Blackwood. She simply continued being herself wherever life placed her. Ethan slowly realized that kindness had never been something she offered only to him or to the castle. It was simply the way she existed in the world. Late on the second afternoon, he finally reached Willow Creek. The town rested beside a wide blue lake surrounded by tall maple trees glowing with brilliant shades of orange and red. Children laughed while skipping stones across the water. Neighbors greeted one another by name, and the entire place carried a peaceful warmth that felt wonderfully ordinary. Ethan tied his horse outside a modest brick building with a hand-painted wooden sign that read Willow Creek Community Clinic. Through the open windows, he heard soft conversation and quiet laughter. He stepped inside expecting urgency, yet found calm instead. Shelves lined with neatly labeled medicine jars stood beside fresh flowers arranged in simple glass vases. Patients waited comfortably with cups of warm tea, while volunteers moved through the room with relaxed smiles. Nothing appeared rushed. Everything simply worked. A familiar feeling settled over him. Then he saw her. Olivia stood near a sunlit window helping an elderly woman organize appointment cards, while gently explaining tomorrow's schedule. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater beneath a light blue apron, her hair loosely tied behind her shoulders. There were no royal banners surrounding her, no grand castle walls, no formal titles. Yet Ethan had never seen her look so peaceful. At that moment, she laughed softly at something the older woman whispered, and the sound carried across the room like the first warm breeze after a long winter. It was a laugh he realized he had almost never heard during the 9 years she had spent beside him. Olivia turned naturally toward the entrance, and for the first time since leaving Blackwood her eyes met Ethan's. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by quiet composure. She did not run into his arms. She did not cry. She simply offered the same gentle smile that had once greeted him every morning in the castle. "Your Majesty," she said politely. Ethan suddenly understood that those two simple words had created a distance between them that had never truly existed before. She no longer belonged to his castle, his routine, or the silent expectations that had shaped her life. She belonged to herself. Standing in the warm afternoon light of a small lakeside clinic, Ethan realized the greatest challenge he had ever faced would not be convincing Olivia Carter to return. It would be proving that the man who had finally found her was no longer the same man who had once failed to truly see her. For a long moment, neither Ethan Blackwood nor Olivia Carter spoke. The quiet sounds of Willow Creek continued around them as neighbors greeted one another. Children laughed near the lakeshore, and the afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh pine across the open windows. Life moved forward without waiting for either of them to decide what came next. Ethan finally stepped closer, carefully placing the small wooden box upon a nearby table. "I found these," he said softly. Olivia recognized the faded blue ribbon immediately, and her peaceful expression wavered for the first time. "My grandmother kept them." Ethan nodded. "She believed I deserved to know who you truly were." Olivia looked at the unopened letters resting inside the box before lifting her eyes to meet his once more. "And now you do." There was no anger in her voice, only quiet honesty. Ethan took a slow breath. "No, I know who you were beside me. I am still learning who you are." The words hung gently between them. They were not dramatic promises or grand declarations. They were simply true. Olivia smiled sadly. "For 9 years I believed that if I loved quietly enough, one day you might finally look at me instead of through me. But somewhere along the way I realized I had stopped looking at myself." Ethan lowered his head. "I cannot change those years." "No," Olivia answered kindly. "Neither of us can." He looked around the small clinic filled with warmth, laughter, and purpose. Every person who entered greeted Olivia by name. Every volunteer smiled when she passed. Every patient trusted her gentle voice. She had built something beautiful without titles, without recognition, and without waiting for anyone's approval. Ethan understood why she looked different. She was no longer surviving inside someone else's story. She was finally living her own. "I came here hoping to bring you home," he admitted. "Now I understand that this is your home unless you choose otherwise." Olivia studied him quietly. There was something different about the Alpha King standing before her. His confidence remained, but the certainty that the world would always arrange itself around his responsibilities had disappeared. In its place stood humility. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan smiled gently. "Now I return to Blackwood and become the kind of leader who notices people before they disappear. I earn forgiveness instead of expecting it. If one day our paths meet again, I hope you will see someone worthy of another conversation." Olivia felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of heartbreak. They were tears of release. For the first time, she did not feel responsible for carrying someone else's emotional burdens. Ethan reached into his coat and removed the silver key she had left behind at the castle. He placed it beside the wooden box. "This belongs to the past," he said. "If you ever return, it will not be because you still carry this key. It will be because your heart freely chooses the road ahead." Olivia gently pushed the key back toward him. "Keep it," she whispered, "not as a reminder of what you lost, but as a reminder to never overlook the quiet hearts standing beside you again." Ethan accepted it with gratitude. Before leaving, he offered one final smile, not to an assistant, not to a loyal servant, and not to someone quietly waiting in the background. He smiled at Olivia Carter, a remarkable woman whose kindness had changed countless lives simply by existing. As he walked toward the door, Olivia called his name. Ethan turned. "Thank you," she said, "for finally seeing me." He nodded, unable to find words worthy of the moment. Months later, travelers passing through Willow Creek often spoke of a compassionate Omega whose gentle spirit made strangers feel like family. They also spoke of an Alpha King whose kingdom had quietly changed. Servants were thanked by name. Young apprentices received encouragement. Elderly villagers found unexpected support. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, was noticed. Some stories end with destiny bringing two hearts together. Others end by teaching both hearts how to become better than they once were. Whether Ethan and Olivia would one day walk the same path again no longer mattered as much as the lesson they carried forward. Love is not measured by how long someone waits to be noticed. Love grows strongest where respect, gratitude, and genuine attention are given freely every single day. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not that someone finally notices your worth. It is that you finally remember it yourself. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who deserves to be appreciated before it is too late. We would also love to hear from you in the comments. Do you believe Ethan deserved a second chance? Or was Olivia right to choose a new beginning? Your thoughts may inspire someone else's journey.